Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the
Buenos días, bienvenidos a la rueda de prensa de nuestro grupo, Socialistas y Demócratas. Es un placer darle la palabra a nuestra presidenta de grupo, Iratxe García, y luego contestaremos preguntas en la sala y por Internet. Adelante.
Buenos días a todas y a todos y feliz 8 de marzo. Es verdad que estamos en circunstancias difíciles, pero no podemos dejar de tener hoy en nuestra mente un día tan importante.
The fact that today is a very important day, the day for women's struggle towards a fairer, more equal society and for justice. You've often heard me say that Europe has to be feminist or she won't be exist at all. We have to fully assume the values that are dearest to the European Union, and feminism is one of them. So a very happy 8th of March, everybody. And again, today we stand with the women who are suffering the most, vulnerable women, women who live in conflict areas. We stand side by shoulder to shoulder with Ukrainian women, Afghan women, and the women in so many far-flung corners of the world who are neglected, forgotten, but who get up every morning trying to make the world a bit better, a bit of a better world. So happy or the best wishes for the Women's Day today, including women journalists who are also part of the struggle to make it all better. Thank you. As I said, of course, this week is very much under the influence of the conflict in Ukraine. This is the horror of war. This is something that had been extirpated, had been removed from Europe for so long, and seemed so distant, but we have to be able to roll out the European project as a project of peace. Europe came into being with a view to bringing about peace, and therefore Europe is more necessary than ever today. We are front row spectators of this horror. Even humanitarian corridors are being bombed. This is a war crime, and we send solidarity to the people of Ukraine who are fighting for their survival. And as I say, when it comes to war crimes, what we trust we will see is Mr. Putin brought before the International Criminal Court and declared guilty of these war crimes as soon as possible. So we stand in solidarity, and we indeed will be judged for what we do, for the decisions we make in this period. We need to be brave, and we need to be prudent. There have been discussions over recent weeks, and sometimes it's very hard to put to one side the emotional ambit, the emotional component of ourselves. But remember, politics has to be done with a calm and cool head and with lots of empathy. And that's why we're working with the European Union. The European Union and its unity is the main weapon for Europeans today. Unity in defense of our values, unity to defend freedom and democracy, unity to defend the rule of law. Indeed, these are the values for which so many Ukrainians, men and women, are now dying. Putin's attack on Ukraine is not just a matter about territory, about land, about taking over the country. It also has a great deal to do with values and one's model. It's a clear attack on democracy. And those people who are defending the territorial integrity of Ukraine today are also defending those values of democracy and freedom. Nor can we neglect the impact of this situation in many other areas, one of which is refugees. You may know that last week I went to the border between Hungary and Ukraine to get a first-hand view of what's going on these borders that Europe shares with Ukraine. And the first thing I want to say is that I'm full of admiration at the commitment, the solidarity, the way so large swathes of Europe's population are giving themselves bodily to this struggle for Ukraine. People are showing their solidarity with the Red Cross and other NGOs, and that's very much required. And that's why we make the point for the role, the need for institutions at all levels, from the European level to the local level, but also national governments. It's not just a matter of making it possible to open our borders to refugees, but also to be able to take on board all of these refugees, men and women, particularly women, who are coming in to Europe. The figures are being mentioned, and this may indeed well be the largest refugee crisis the European Union has faced ever. Possibly more than 4 million refugees in just 10 days, men, women and children. And there are many more yet to come. And this, of course, requires a clear commitment from us that we're going to do what we should. We have given the green light to the Protection Directive, which will ensure not only that these refugees can come onto our territory, but will also be provided with everything that they may require for their health, their education, housing, access to the job market. But over and above those issues, we also need to talk about the commitment for the distribution of these refugees right across the European Union, because such a large number of refugees cannot be simply managed by the bordering countries, the countries that happen to border with Ukraine. So there we have to work on agreements for distribution as well. The Commissioner Hansen will be coming to the Socialist and Democratic group this afternoon to talk about this, and I'll be having a bilateral meeting with her tomorrow on this, and everything we can do to manage all of the aspects of this unprecedentedly large number of refugees arriving, we will do. But I also wish to add that when we're talking about refugees, we're talking about human beings, wherever they may be from, whatever the color of their skin may be. And from the Socialists and Democrats' view of Europe, the Social and Democrats' Europe, we will insist that we can't make any distinctions among these persons, whatever the color of their skin may be, whatever their faith may be, for example. And that's what we're working towards. And I've referred to the greatest consequence, which is the humanitarian one, these refugees coming into the European Union. But we have to also to revert to other consequences, such as the economic impact. It's perfectly apparent that as a result of the economic sanctions that we have applied, there will be such an impact. And there'll be a summit of prime ministers this week. And we'll have to see if we can tackle these consequences. We need to talk about how we can get as many economic resources as possible flowing to face this situation. So maybe more than ever, we now need the debate on the fiscal rules, on the budget rules, that is, in Europe. And we need to talk about about energy Europe as well. We need short, medium, and long-term measures regarding energy. We've been talking about this for many years now. Now we're facing the brutal reality. Europe needs to not be dependent in the energy field, so as not to be taken hostage as we are right now. And thus we must ensure that we're able to give a vigorous response, as I say, short, medium and long-term measures having to do with energy efficiency, with greater use of renewable energy sources, having to do with diversification and energy interconnections, energy connections among all the different parts of the EU, so today the European Commission is going to table a plan in this regard. Frans Timmermans, Vice President, will be joining our group to set out the main lines of that plan in a communication. And this is likely to be another of the main issues that we're going to address over forthcoming weeks and months, and without a doubt. There are other items on this week's agenda. There's the report on disinformation and interference in electoral processes, which has a great deal to do with what I've been talking about so far this morning, the role played by Russia as a country that tries to destabilize other powers. Over the last year and a half, the committee that's been working on this issue has found clear evidence of this interference in electoral processes elsewhere, pursuant to Putin's clear goal of destabilizing democracies abroad. So we need to recognize the work that's been done by this committee and that's going to be voted upon this week. It's very necessary that that committee be able to continue its work. So, as you know, we've made the decision to renew the mandate of that special committee for another year. Now, I'm going to wind up talking about the 8th of March again, just as I began talking about it. The 8th of March, we trust that today the European Commission will finally adopt the proposed legislation for a Europe against gender violence. President van der Leyen committed to that at the last plenary last year after the S&D group had been working for many years on this aspiration, on this claim. There's no clearer manifestation of injustice in any country, in any area, if part of the population feels that they are under threat simply because of their gender. Now, gender violence is a reality right across the EU, right across the world, and we clearly need to increase the commitment from European institutions against gender violence. It's not just a matter of resources, but also a matter of legislation. There was an absolute need for a European directive against gender violence. So I think that today's a historic day in Europe because of this commitment to defend women. We look forward to seeing the details of this draft legislation, of this proposal. We're sure that there'll be a lot of room for improvement. But hey, that's our task here in the Parliament, and we will do our job once the European Commission has tabled the proposal for legislation. We'll be able to debate it here in the chamber, and we'll be able to enhance the contents of it. But I think it was essential, it was indispensable that we get such a proposal. So I think it's necessary that in the midst of so much bad news, so much appalling news, we need to flag that today a step is being made in the right direction in this important struggle towards the Europe that we, of both genders, need to work together to build. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Iratxe. And now it's time for your questions. I see one. Please indicate your name and medium.
Anna Vandensky from Europe Diplomatic. I have a question on Ukraine, because your party previously for 8 years were saying that there is no military solution to the conflict in Ukraine, and now you changed and are being a Nobel Prize winner. Europe started to export arms, or lethal arms. That was a decision taken by the foreign ministers. And why your party has changed this paradigm, why you started to support this new line of the foreign ministers?
No sé si usted se está refiriendo a...
I'm not sure if you're talking about the Party of European Socialists or any specific party or possibly even the government of my own country. But I shall labour a point that I believe is obvious. Of course, facing any situation like the one we're facing today, intervention from abroad, war, this needs to be solved through dialogue and through negotiation. But what we can't allow is that while the work of diplomacy is ongoing, one side of the conflict is under attack and suffering deaths, suffering casualties from the attacking party, in this instance, Russia. At the extraordinary plenary a week ago, I said, and I'll repeat now, let's take an example. During the Spanish Civil War, the people who were defending the democracy, freedom, and the Republic waited for a long time for help from Europe, and the help from Europe never arrived in the Spanish Civil War. And those fighting for freedom and democracy found that they were on their own. We don't want to leave the Ukrainian people who've decided to stay in Ukraine to defend the values of freedom and democracy feel on their own. They are the party that's under attack. They are the weakest and the most vulnerable in this conflict. We can't allow them to be murdered while standing aside with our arms folded. So we cannot accept the idea that diplomacy, which is the way out, is incompatible with the use of weapons. Of course, diplomacy is the solution, but we cannot neglect, we cannot reject those who are giving up their lives for Europe's common values, which are freedom and democracy.
Are there further questions? I look around. I think, do we have any questions online? I don't think so at this stage. If that is not one follow-up question? Another question, okay.
Of course, you started to talk about gender violence, but also the other very important issues, because today it's 8th of March. And my question is about our salaries and equal pay, because it's also a very important subject, and many women suffered during 2 years of COVID. Can you tell us what your party, I mean, Socialists and Democrats of the European Parliament, are undertaking to resolve this problem of a pay gap?
Pues está claro que la...
Well, obviously, the pay gap is another clear sign of the imbalance in the society in which we live. We have raised a number of proposals in this regard, and I wish to remind you that after many years fighting for this directive on salary transparency, wage transparency, the European Commission has now put that on the table, and that's obviously a big step forward, that we should have European legislation progressing towards wage transparency so that one can monitor what's actually going on with people's pay. So that's definitely a measure in the right direction. But as well as pay transparency, we have to talk of other issues pertaining to the role of collective bargaining, wage bargaining, and the role of the unions, the trade unions, when it comes to bringing about wage equality, and of course combating the stereotypes that currently obtain on the job market, as a result of which some of the jobs that have been traditionally done, some jobs are traditionally done by women, when it happens that they tend to be the lowest paid and lowest category jobs. So we have to struggle towards equal representation of women in all segments of the labour market. But I would stress that the most important thing here is the directive on wage transparency that we've been fighting for many years, and that the Commission recently put on the table. Thank you.
Please.
Hi, Dave Keating, France 24. We have the energy strategy coming out from the Commission today. Do you foresee any circumstance that this strategy could give European countries enough confidence to extend sanctions to the energy field and risk having Russian exports cut off to Europe? Or do you think that energy still needs to be ring-fenced out of those sanctions?
Lo que necesitamos...
What we need is to ensure that there can be energy efficiency right across the European Union in such a way that this supply can be assured to all corners of the European Union. That's what the Commission is working on now. We'll see the terms of the communication, the proposal. We also, of course, need commitments from member states. So we will await the extraordinary meeting of the Council of Ministers in Versailles this week, where I'm sure this will be an important item on the agenda. But in any event, the ultimate goal of the European Union needs to be full energy independence so that we can manage the kind of situation we're currently facing. This through support for renewable energy sources, of course, and energy interconnections, and the search for other energy sources which will make us less vulnerable and less exposed and dependent than we are now on gas and oil.
The more questions come. One more question in the back, please.
Oui, bonjour Madame Simon Chenot pour QEJ.
Thank you very much. Perhaps the speaker could be asked to remove his mask, please. Thank you. That's appreciated. Thank you from the interpreters. Good morning. The Parliament is addressing the matter of foreign interference, and social media play a key role there. How can one work with the platforms to prevent the risk of interference on social media?
Sí, estas cuestiones vienen reflejadas.
Those issues are covered in the report that we're going to adopt, of course, in the Parliament today, setting out a number of actions. Now, the role of social networks is such that, of course, reality's life's very different to what it was a few decades ago. But these platforms, these networks have a major responsibility when it comes to preventing the dissemination of fake news and disinformation, and in the prevention of hate speech. So we need to come up with all possible instruments towards that end. I believe the platforms, the media, have a major responsibility to shoulder, but we in the institutions do too, to negotiate with them. The freedom of the platforms and individual freedoms need to be made compatible with the non-dissemination of fake news. And that's not the case right now, so we're working towards it, and the platforms have a responsibility.
Good week. Thanks a lot, Iratxe. And if there are more questions, we can take them outside. Merci.